The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. Filling in for Joe Pugh, I'm Jack Corfield. On December 7th, 1941, Japan attacked the Hawaiian island port of Pearl Harbor. That same day, Canada declared war on Japan. This event, combined with existing anti-Asian sentiment among white Canadians in British Columbia at that time, led to the mass displacement and dispossession of Japanese Canadians living on the West Coast. Today, we'll speak to the president of Central Vancouver Island Japanese Canadian Culture Society and third-generation Japanese Canadian Tami Hirasawa. Then, later in the show, we'll speak with Theresa Hood, a representative from the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom's Nanaimo chapter, who hold an annual Lanterns for Peace ceremony on August 6th in Sway-a-Lana Lagoon, commemorating the atrocities visited upon the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by atomic weapons. But for now, please welcome Tami Hirasawa. Welcome, Tami Hirasawa. You are the president of the Central Vancouver Island Japanese Canadian Culture Society. That society also goes by another name, the Seven Potatoes. Can you explain that name for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Jack. So the seven potato, we call ourselves the Seven Potatoes because in Japanese, nana is seven and imo is potato. And so it's a literal translation of the word Nanaimo is seven potatoes. And so we've just always called ourselves the Seven Potatoes.
I love that. You have a very long official name, and just to have that nice little shorthand is great. So, Tami, you are a third-generation Japanese Canadian, and I understand that your family was directly affected by the history of displacement and dispossession, which occurred between 1942 to 1950. Japanese Canadians lost their homes and jobs and were forced into internment camps for the majority of the Second World War. Would you be willing to share how that history has impacted your family?
Sure. So my grandfathers on both my mother's side and my father's side came from Japan in the early 1900s, like probably around like 1904-ish, and established themselves. My grandfather on my father's side did a lot of logging and things like that. But then he became a naturalized Canadian in 1910, and he purchased 20 acres in Surrey, BC, and he farmed the land, mostly strawberries, but he also raised chickens and other vegetables. And he had a really thriving farm in Surrey. He cleared the land. It was like totally like forest when he bought it, and cleared the land about a half an acre a year. And by the time, so starting in 1911, he cleared half an acre a year. So by like 1938, 39, he had about 18, 19 acres cleared, and his farm was profiting like $6,000 a year. And then during 1942, they were uprooted. They were sent to southern Alberta, and his farm was sold without his knowledge and without his consent in 1943. I think he got less than $2,000 for it. Like, I mean, there's these letters that are from the digital archives that we can look back. His letters going back and forth to the custodian. It was a custodian of enemy alien property. That was the title of the federal government's, the department that was looking after the forced sale of all the Japanese Canadian properties.
And what was the role of this custodian?
Well, the custodian was supposed to be taking care, like looking after the property for them while they were, being sent away for their own safety. But in fact, it was more like an incarceration. And the plan to sell all of their properties and their fishing boats and like everything that was sold, it was really it was a forced sale. Like there was no consent involved with that.
I see. And so then in 1945, the Canadian government, at the urging of BC's provincial government, mandated that Japanese Canadians move east of the Rockies or be exiled to Japan. Where did your family go, and how did they return to the West Coast eventually?
So my family decided to move east. They were actually in southern Alberta doing sugar beets, which was basically like it was part of the war effort really, to have Japanese Canadians living on the sugar beet farms. They weren't really given any housing. It was more like I think my mom was in a granary on one of the farms, or in a chicken coop kind of in another farm, and that's where they were housed, and then they worked the sugar beets for pennies. I mean, it was like really not enough to really sustain themselves for a living. So they were there until my mom and dad got married in 1955, and then they moved to Hamilton, Ontario, and that's where I was born and raised. I didn't really return to the West Coast until 2018. So the rest of my family is still mostly in Ontario.
I see. Just to jump back a little bit, you mentioned that your grandfather was a naturalized Canadian. That still came with a restricted set of rights at that time, right?
Yes, there was a law that was put into place where anyone of Asian descent or Indigenous people were not allowed to vote. And because they didn't have the franchise, they couldn't be in any professions. Like you couldn't be a doctor or a lawyer, or because you couldn't vote. And they also couldn't, do jury duty or things like that. So it was a big deal. They didn't actually get the franchise until April of 1949. The government could really legislate that, Japanese Canadian fishermen could not fish in all of the 5 districts. They could only fish for certain things. They couldn't fish for salmon. There was a lot of restrictions put on them.
Nanaimo was known as the world's herring capital before the war was used as an excuse for white supremacists to displace and dispossess Japanese Canadians. I know Seven Potatoes has done a huge amount of work in creating awareness of that history. Because of that work, there's an exhibit now at the museum in Nanaimo called From Herring Capital to Seven Potatoes. Can you tell me a bit about that history and what people can find out from that exhibit?
Oh, yeah. The exhibit is fabulous. I was really grateful that the Nanaimo Museum actually reached out to the Seven Potatoes to collaborate on all the wording and like the exhibits. And like we were really involved in that whole exhibit right from the start. And the Nanaimo Museum was wonderful in terms of collaborating with us. So it really talks about the thriving community that was here in Nanaimo prior to 1942. So there was like 43 herring salteries, like between Departure Bay, Seisutchen, Protection Island, Jessie Island. There was all up and down Stewart Avenue was a big bustling Japanese Canadian community. They had shopkeepers and shoemakers and grocery stores, and like there was a Japanese language school that was right at the corner of Stewart and Juniper. And it was such a economic force in Nanaimo prior, like in the 1920s and 1930s. So I feel like not many people know. And then all of a sudden in 1942, there was nobody, there was zero. So it was quite the shock, I feel like.
And with that sort of like dispossession that occurred in that situation where, everybody's been essentially kicked out of Nanaimo at that point, what happened to all those businesses?
So they were sold. They were auctioned off. They had auctions for all the possessions. So all the possessions were auctioned off, and all of the properties, businesses, everything was auctioned off. Some of the houses along Stewart Avenue were actually given to World War I veterans and veterans that were coming back from the war. There's a digital archive through the Landscapes of Injustice, which is a project that was done out of the University of Victoria. And in that project, they have digitized all these letters and all the information about all the Japanese Canadian properties. It's a really amazing property, and I've learned so much from it. So you can actually go to these to this website and search for a particular business, and it'll show you how much it was worth and how much it was sold for and who it was sold to.
With sort of looking at the museum reaching out to you and to the Seven Potatoes for information on this, what was the process for you, and like what did you have to get for them?
So I have a real strong interest in the history of Nanaimo, Japanese Canadian history in Nanaimo. And I reached out to my good friend Masako Fukawa. She was one of the founding members of the Seven Potatoes. Her husband was actually the founding president of the Seven Potatoes, Stanley Fukawa, and he also taught at Malaspina College at the time. So she was very instrumental in helping us with the history of the Japanese Canadians in Nanaimo. We would get together with the Nanaimo Museum and go over what is it that we really want to say. We really wanted to get an emotional impact with the exhibit so that it wasn't just like, 22,000 people did this or whatever. It wasn't just facts. It was, here's the actual stuff that they lost. This is like, we really wanted to get at the emotional side of it of, if you had to leave within 24 hours, you had to pack a suitcase, what would you take? Those are the things that you'll see at the exhibit when you go. There's an actual suitcase and you can put stuff into it. Yeah.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Support Midcoast Morning and CHLY's nonprofit newsroom today by becoming a sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. Local news can't survive without your support. If you're listening to the podcast edition of Midcoast Morning, go and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast feed you use. It helps people find us.
Today on the program, we're talking with Tami Hirasawa, a third-generation Japanese Canadian and president of the Central Vancouver Island Japanese Canadian Culture Society, also known as Seven Potatoes. So far, we've covered the history of Japanese Canadian dispossession, displayed in a permanent exhibit in the Nanaimo Museum. In a few minutes, we'll hear from Theresa Hood, who will speak for Women's International League of Peace and Freedom's Nanaimo chapter about their annual August 6th Lanterns for Peace ceremony. For now, let's return to our interview with Tami. The Nanaimo Museum is also currently featuring another exhibit, which is on display until September 2nd, called Broken Promises. How does this exhibit differ from the Herring Capital of Seven Potatoes?
So the Herring Capital Seven Potatoes exhibit is specific to the Japanese Canadians in Nanaimo. The Broken Promises exhibit is a traveling exhibit. It was curated by the Nikkei Museum in Burnaby, and also with the Landscapes of Injustice Project through University of Victoria. And it highlights 7 Japanese Canadians, a little bit about, where they came from, and then, what did they do and where did they go and how much did they lose? It mostly focuses on the dispossession of what people lost, which is very interesting because in the Japanese American side, which they were also uprooted and sent to internment camps, but they were allowed to go back as soon as the war was over, and they didn't lose all of their possessions. So Southern California has a lot of Japanese Americans, and they have Japan towns, whereas in Canada we don't really have Japantown anywhere in Canada. We were all really dispersed throughout, and then after the war, my mom and dad, they were really like trying to fit in and be really good Canadians. When I was growing up, I never learned how to speak Japanese. It was a lot of loss of, I really feel like I wish I could speak Japanese because I look Japanese, but, we were just trying to be really good Canadians and trying to fit in.
So recently, there's been some token efforts from the Canadian government to apologize and make reparations, particularly to the First Nations communities. What has the Japanese community received in this regard?
Wow. So, I mean, I'm very deeply aware of all the injustices of the Indigenous people in Canada, and I'm trying to learn a lot more about it. I feel like that is such a strong injustice, and we really need to be working towards all the truth and reconciliation avenues that we can. We have this Japanese Canadian Legacy Societies that was a part of working with the BC government, because the BC government was so strong in their wanting to get the Japanese Canadians out in the 1940s, even before the 1940s, actually. Like, it started in 1907. Really, with the Asiatic Exclusion League. So there's really a lot of evidence that the BC government was really wanting the Japanese Canadians out of BC. And so in 2023, Premier Horgan did commit to creating this society, this Japanese Canadian Legacy Society. And so Nanaimo's been really working with the BC government and with the Japanese Canadian Legacy Society and trying to create some more awareness of the Japanese Canadian story. There really isn't any signage or anything right now in Nanaimo to say that Japanese Canadians ever lived here. And so we're trying to create a Japanese Canadian heritage site. And we also are trying to work towards a Japanese Canadian place where we can meet. And so those are some of the things that we're working towards, but it's still a work in progress.
So every year for the past 23 years, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom in Nanaimo's chapter has held a Lanterns for Peace ceremony, which at the time of this episode is coming out yesterday on the 6th of August. This day marks the 79th year since the bombing of Hiroshima. What does this ceremony mean to you?
The August 6th is a day that we use it to recognize and remember really the bombing of the atomic bombing that occurred in Hiroshima, Japan. And we really use it to say, we never want this ever to happen again. And so we look to the survivors of the bombings, which in Japanese, we call that hibakusha. And they really have a message to the world in that they want the abolishment of nuclear weapons. They want people to work together to create a more peaceful world. The atrocities, the pain and suffering that they suffered during the aftermath of the atomic bomb is really, they have a story to tell. But those hibakusha are really, pretty soon there won't be any more hibakusha that are living anymore. And so it's really up to us, like us being like, the people in general, to really carry on their message.
And what's been the involvement of Seven Potatoes in this event?
So I realize that this has been going on for over 20 years. That the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom have been supporting this event and creating this wonderful day. And the Mayor Krogh comes and declares Nanaimo a nuclear-free zone. So that's also wonderful. And I'm really proud that Nanaimo can do that. The Seven Potatoes, I just became president in 2021 during COVID. And I think they had their very first Lantern Festival after COVID in 2022. And so that's when I started coming and just sharing information about the Japanese Canadians in Nanaimo at the event. So I'm really grateful to the Women's League of International Peace and Freedom for including me.
And one last question for you, just sort of in a general wrap up of all of this information, what do you hope will come from increasing awareness of this history?
What do I hope will come? I think that just remembering the atomic bomb and the aftermath, I think that really looking towards a future that we can abolish nuclear weapons. I think it's going to take a long time, but even if it takes a long time, I think it's definitely worth speaking up about it and working towards that.
Thank you so much, Tami, for this interview and for your work as part of Seven Potatoes and creating this historical archive for us at the Nanaimo Museum that will be a permanent exhibit.
Well, thanks for having me. And I really look forward to seeing people at the Nanaimo Museum. And I think it's got a great message. And yeah, there's lots more things that the Seven Potatoes are doing. So that's great.
On August 6th, 1945, the atomic bomb called Little Boy was dropped on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. 3 days later, another atomic bomb, Fat Boy, was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. This was the first time, and to this day the last time, nuclear weapons have been used in war. This August 6th, 2024 marks the 79th year since the first atomic bomb was detonated. In commemoration of this tragic event, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom's Nanaimo chapter has organized an annual Lanterns for Peace ceremony for the past 23 years. I have with me now one of the members of this organization, Theresa Hood.
I'm Theresa Hood. I'm been a member of WILF Nanaimo chapter for about 4 years, and I'm a longtime member of the Nanaimo community. Lived here for 35 years, and yes.
What is the mission of Women's International League for Peace?
Well, you can find that on the WILF International website. basically it's a feminist pacifist organization that works for environmental justice, demilitarization, and the advancement of human rights, and working for a future of sustainable peace. One thing I'll say about WILF, WILF International was founded in 1915, and Japan founded their WILF section in 1921, and it's one of the oldest and most active sections in WILF.
So the Lanterns for Peace ceremony, it borrows a lot of imagery from the traditional Japanese lantern festivals. Can you speak to the symbolism of the lanterns and what this event means to you?
Well, the Japanese have had lantern ceremonies. It's a tradition there where they honor their ancestors. And so we adopted it for our celebration. And for us, it's a way to honor the people that were affected by the bombings and to just mark our hope for sustainable world peace.
I spoke earlier with Tami Hirasawa of the Seven Potatoes about the connection between Japanese-Canadian culture and this lantern ceremony. I know she has a role as a speaker at this event. What else occurs at the ceremony?
Well, the mayor speaks, he opens the ceremony, and the MLA and the MP usually say a few words. And we have the Nanaimo Harp Ensemble is going to be playing several pieces for us. And Margaret Sutton from Gabriola will come over and play Japanese flute.
You mentioned Mayor Krogh comes and declares Nanaimo I believe as part of his speech, he declares Nanaimo a nuclear-free zone, a sort of yearly tradition in this regard. And I'm sure some people have maybe seen the signs along the highway when entering town, which declare that Nanaimo is a nuclear-free zone. What's the importance of this declaration?
It's a declaration that our city does not welcome any nuclear weapons. And it seems, maybe it seems a little silly to some people, but it's a start. And for years now, there's been petitions for a prohibition treaty, prohibition of nuclear weapons. And I'm not sure how many states have signed it. But Canada has not signed it as yet.
So it's something that individual townships, for example, Nanaimo, have made this declaration and made this effort to support the signing of this this non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. And it seems like, there are certainly other places in the world that do the same, but it's something that it seems like a sort of cause that this lantern ceremony represents and reminds people that this is something that is ongoing.
Yes, certainly. But I don't know if the city has officially come out in support of the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And there is a treaty about the non-proliferation, but this treaty that we're trying to establish and many states have signed on to is the prohibition of nuclear weapons. So it goes a little bit further.
I see. So the difference there is that a non-proliferation would mean no more creation, but prohibition would mean like the dismantling and removal of these.
Yes, yes.
If Wilf, and you particularly, if you could expand the lantern ceremony in some way, either with more resources or with more people power, what would you do?
Well, that's a very good question. I'm not sure we have the energy to expand it, but if it could be expanded, I imagine there could be more in-depth talks, maybe more music, more posters and educationals on peace and how to achieve peace in the world.
I can see how those would be good additions to just sort of in general expand it and increase the volume of accessibility to it as well. How many people do you find often come to these events?
Between 60 and 100.
Okay, so it's not a huge crowd coming, but it's with the attendance of the mayor and the MP, it's quite a respectfully accepted event for the city to send these major figures from the city to represent.
Yes, and the city has declared August 6th that this is Hiroshima Day.
And just one last question for you. Do you think there will be ever a time when we don't need an event like this lantern ceremony?
I hope so. But it can get discouraging to see how difficult it is to make changes. And, the powers that be are still operating from a certain type of paradigm. And, but, Diane Brown once said, when I was discouraged, she told me, well, we're like Sisyphus. We are rolling the rock up the mountain, but we're doing it together and we're having fun. So I think that's a great way to look at activism, is we're doing it together. We're doing what we can, and we'll have some fun doing it.
I wonder if Sisyphus has ever tried working with anybody else to get that rock up the hill, hey?
Yeah.
Might actually work then. I think it will.
Yes. That.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Theresa. That's all the questions I have.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jack.
That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Jack Corfield, fill-in host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and RB Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe for updates from our nonprofit newsroom. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca.
Midcoast Morning would not be possible without the funding of the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Midcoast Morning is a project of CHLY's nonprofit newsroom. Support nonprofit journalism in Nanaimo and on the Salish Sea today by becoming a monthly sustaining donor at $5 or more per month. Support the program at chly.ca/donate. If you're already a supporter, record a voice memo telling others where you're listening from and why they too should support our work. After you're done, you can email it to us. Finally, this program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.